Today, we're cracking open a truly harrowing true crime case file straight out of Incheon, South Korea. We're going to conduct a full legal autopsy on a deadly exorcism. And look, this isn't just your standard story about a horrific ritual. We're investigating a shocking legal loophole that has left an entire nation deeply unsettled. We're going to piece together exactly how absolute psychological control ended in an agonizing death and figure out how the justice system came to two drastically, and I mean entirely, different conclusions for the exact same crime.
Right off the bat, you've got to ask yourself the core paradox of this entire case file. How does a brutal 3-hour fatal exorcism result in just a 7-year prison sentence for the main perpetrator? Seriously, 7 years. Today, I want you to put on your investigator hat and maybe even channel your inner skeptical criminal defense attorney. We're going to analyze the evidence piece by piece, contradiction by contradiction, to understand exactly how a completely airtight murder conviction essentially vanished overnight.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for making sense of this. First, a deadly ritual unfolds. Second, the shaman's psychological grip. Third, the case for brutal murder. Fourth, the defense tears it down. And finally, belief, intent, and law. Section 1. A deadly ritual unfolds. Let's set the scene and trace our timeline here. The whole incident centers around a 30-year-old woman surnamed Shim. So, it's the fall of 2024, and Shim is desperately trying to break free from her aunt. She just wants to quit her job at her aunt's business and leave. Sounds normal, right? Well, her aunt happened to be a practicing shaman, and when Shim tried to leave, the aunt flat out claimed she wasn't actually seeking independence. No, she claimed Shim was possessed by an evil spirit that absolutely had to be expelled. That brings us to September 18th, 2024 in Incheon, where the ritual took place. Fast forward exactly 1 year to September 2025, and the Incheon District Court drops a life sentence, treating this as a clear-cut case of brutal murder. But then, we get the legal whiplash. In April 2026, an appellate court completely overturns that foundation and drastically reduces the sentence. To understand how on earth that happened, we have to look really closely at the undisputed facts of September 18th. The physical reality of what happened during this ritual is just grueling. Imagine looking at the crime scene photos. The victim was bound, face down, completely immobilized on a metal frame. And for roughly 3 agonizing hours, burning charcoal was placed directly underneath her body. And this wasn't just a static fire either. The perpetrators were continuously replenishing the charcoal, exposing her to relentless, extreme heat. What makes this even more chilling is that the shaman wasn't working alone. She was actively being helped by her own children, the victim's cousins, and other devoted followers. Ultimately, the victim succumbed to multiple organ failure the very next day because of the catastrophic burns she sustained. Those are the horrific, undisputed facts of the physical trauma. But physical restraints? That's really only half the story. Section 2. The shaman's psychological grip. Now, what's really interesting about this is trying to understand why the victim's own cousins would help tie her to a metal frame over burning coals. To get that, we have to examine the anatomy of a microcult. The shaman hadn't just built a business. She had constructed a psychological prison. She had absolute control over her family and her followers. She completely weaponized financial dependence. Her family and followers worked directly for her, so their entire livelihood was tied up in her good graces. But beyond the money, she weaponized spiritual fear. She had ingrained this unwavering belief in them that her rituals were literally the only way to solve any of life's problems. They had surrendered all independent decision-making to her. Basically, she eradicated their free will. So in their warped, terrifying reality, this exorcism wasn't a violent attack. It was a strictly necessary cure. So, let's step into the courtroom. Section 3, the case for brutal murder. When this first went to trial in September 2025, the prosecution took one look at the sheer cruelty of the facts and pushed for strict, uncompromising criminal liability. And at first, they won a massive sweeping victory. The Incheon District Court handed down a life sentence for the shaman, 20 to 25 years for 4 of her accomplices and 10 years for 2 others. To the state, the initial judge, and frankly, the deeply disturbed public, there was zero ambiguity here. The court declared the act exceptionally cruel and inhumane. It was a total slam dunk. Justice, it seemed, was served.
Let's review the prosecution's docket that secured those massive sentences. If you're a skeptical defense attorney reviewing this initial case file, it honestly looks like an impenetrable wall of evidence. The prosecution argued the physical action was undeniable, calculated torture. But their main pillar for proving the actual intent to kill? That was the medical response, or, the lack of it. There was a fatal delay in getting the victim medical help. And to top it off, when the police finally arrived, the perpetrators gave wildly inconsistent stories. So to the prosecution, delayed help plus inconsistent stories equals a calculated cover-up and a clear intent to murder. If we stop right here, the narrative is perfectly clean. Brutal murder, clumsy cover-up. Done.
But wait, the story doesn't end there. Section 4, the defense tears it down. Okay, I want you to fully adopt the perspective of the defense attorney preparing for the April 2026 appeal, because the appellate court was handed a totally different interpretation of the exact same evidence. The defense looked at the prosecution's whole calculated cover-up narrative and just tore it to shreds by pointing out some glaring contradictions. Think like a defense lawyer for a second. The prosecution says cover-up, but look at the actual behavior of the accused. Murderers who are actively trying to hide their crimes do not call 119. That's the emergency line in South Korea. But these perpetrators did. Murderers don't attempt CPR on their victims, but again, they did. And perhaps the absolute most damning thing for the prosecution's case, the CCTV footage of the entire horrific event was left completely intact. There was zero attempt to hide, tamper with, or delete the security tapes. The defense basically said, look, people carrying out a calculated murder simply do not leave the security cameras rolling and then call the paramedics. And because of those incredible contradictions, we get the truly shocking result of the appeal. The charge was entirely dropped from murder down to fatal bodily injury. The appellate court essentially acknowledged that yes, while the assault absolutely caused the death, the fundamental goal wasn't to kill her. So life behind bars turned into a mere 7-year sentence for the shaman. Literally 7 years. And her followers, the ones who actively helped tie the victim down to the frame, their sentences were completely suspended. They walked free.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core of our legal autopsy. Section 5, belief, intent, and law. How exactly does a life sentence just vanish? Well, it all comes down to a highly specific legal loophole regarding mens rea, which is your state of mind. Specifically, there's a concept called conditional intent in South Korean law. Under the system, just knowing there is a massive risk of serious harm or death is not enough to convict someone of murder. The perpetrator must actually accept death as the intended outcome of their actions. The defense brilliantly exploited this exact wording. They argued that simply knowing a 3-hour fire ritual is incredibly dangerous doesn't legally prove the shaman explicitly wanted her niece to die. They argued she was reckless, sure, but not murderous. This wildly complex legal needle threading is perfectly captured in a chilling quote from the appellate court's reasoning. The judge stated, the shaman conducted the ritual believing it was a form of healing. Furthermore, the victim's mother requested leniency. I really want you to let that sink in. The shaman's extreme, deviant cultural belief in healing literally negated her criminal intent to kill in the eyes of the law. Healing became her ultimate legal shield. And adding just a deeply tragic, almost incomprehensible layer to the whole thing, the victim's own mother, who was deeply entrenched in this cult-like family dynamic, formally requested leniency for the exact same people who tortured and killed her daughter. As you might expect, this ruling exposed a raw, highly sensitive nerve in modern South Korean society. The country is grappling with these deep-rooted shamanistic traditions, clashing violently with modern criminal law. Citizens are incredibly uncomfortable with this blend of extreme spiritual belief acting as a get-out-of-jail-free card for a murder charge. Out on the streets, there is rampant speculation and rumors that elite, high-priced law firms exploited these loopholes, along with unverified suspicions of bribery swaying the bench to view the shaman favorably. Now, we are just reporting on the existence of these rumors, not endorsing them, but they clearly highlight a profound breakdown in public trust. It has sparked massive, widespread calls for new, modernized laws that specifically regulate dangerous religious and spiritual rituals so this legal loophole can be closed for good. So, I want to leave you with a pretty provocative thought.
If you genuinely believe you're saving someone's soul, does it legally excuse destroying their body? Is this a genuine case of misguided, extreme spiritual healing where the true intent wasn't murder? Or was the appellate court completely manipulated by a brilliantly calculated legal defense? You've seen the raw evidence, you've traced the timelines, and we've dug into the specific legal loopholes. I really encourage you to think about where you stand on this deeply unsettling, complex case. Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the evidence around you.